Okay, thanks, Russ. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Mary Dolan, and I'm starting my 6th year, actually, as a consultant for the Pennsylvania Department of Education in the role of bullying prevention consultant. In the past, we've had the honor of meeting in person, which I still prefer to get the partnership together in person, but I think, logistically and for cost of travel, sometimes it is better to do an online meeting. I'd still like to host a meeting in the springtime where we get together. But what I'd like to do is just take a minute, if everyone can just kind of chime in and just say their name and their organization. We're not going to go into updates at this point for purpose of time, but there'll be definitely opportunity throughout the PowerPoint where you can talk about what's new in your agency or organization. So if we could just go ahead and just start to jump in, that'd be fantastic.
This is Deb Gadsden.
Thanks, Deb. And
from where?
Family Child.
I'm sorry. I'm from Family Design Resources.
Thank you.
This is Steve Leff from the Children's Hospital, and I'll be on the line for about the first half an hour, 40 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Steve is new to our partnership. I had the honor of working with Dr. Leff and the initiative. Oh, come on. I'm like, why am I drawing a blank here? I'm coming back from helping as a grandma, Steve. That's my excuse. I can't think of the name of the assembly. Help me.
Yeah, the Free to Be program, the Free to Bullying Prevention.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Our colleagues from CHOP are on, and then Center for Health Promotion and Disease Prevention, the CHIP-DIP folks.
Mary, Carla, and Cheryl here. Hi, Mary. Hi, everyone.
Okay, Carla and Cheryl, hello.
Good morning, everyone. This is Leah Galkowski from the Center for Safe Schools.
Hi, Leah. Glad you could join today.
Mary.
This is Geraldine.
Hi, this is Juanita Curtin from the Bureau of Special Ed. I'm a special education advisor.
Thank you, Juanita. And Geraldine Johnson?
This is Geraldine Johnson from Cumberland Valley School District.
Okay.
Lamana Benucci from the Children's Bureau, representing for Shea.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Adrian Miller from Family Design Resources.
Adrian, okay, thank you.
Jason Landau Goodman from the Pennsylvania Youth Congress.
Hey, Jason, long time no see. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you.
Good.
This is Tim Noster from the McDowell Institute at Bloomsburg University.
Hi, Tim. And Tim is new to our partnership as well. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks.
This is Jane Reese from Clemson University and the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program.
Hi, Jane. And Jane is new to our partnership as well.
Thanks, Mary.
Sure.
Stacy Molnar-Main, consultant with the Pennsylvania Department of Education focused on school climate.
Hi, Stacy.
Hey, this is Jeff Coltrane with PCCD.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for continuing to be at the table. And the Pennsylvania Youth Survey continues to give us amazing data. We'll be talking about our favorite topic of data in a little bit. Okay. Anybody else?
Back.
Oh, hi, Nick. Nick, do you want to? I want to give us a quick elevator version of your role here with PDE.
Sure. I'm the Health and Physical Education Advisor. I'm also currently working with the 1308- grant through CDC, which tries to improve upon comprehensive sexual health education, sexual health services out to students, and then supporting schools with safe and supportive environments.
Right, and we have found that to be really fascinating, interesting work with the connection with teen pregnancy and health education and connecting with bullying prevention and school climate. Right, Nick? That's been a very interesting connect here at the department.
It has.
Okay. Anybody else?
Heidi Stark from North Allegheny School District in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Well, hello, Heidi Stark. Welcome. We're glad you could join us. It's fantastic. You know, we have our representatives from the LEAs, AKA the real world. So we appreciate you taking time to be on board today.
Sure.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I think if we got everyone, okay, we'll get rolling. So, all righty, let me just make sure that I'm succeeding with. Okay, I've got two screens going here. I'm bad enough with one screen. So the purpose of today's meeting is we're going to just take a quick look at the current state as we know it of bullying prevention in Pennsylvania. We're going to discuss assessing needs of the schools, and certainly this is where the partnership comes in deeply as to how can everyone be at the table and help with that needs assessment. We're going to talk about aligning supportive resources and, of course, the need for continuing bullying prevention 101 in our state. You know, folks here on the call are part of the history, many of the folks, and some of our members are a little bit new, but just without going into any detail, I think it's always important to take a look, a snapshot at our history here in Pennsylvania that I think we're all quite proud of, and we know the deep work that has occurred. So I just highlighted a couple, and I'll send this PowerPoint to you after the Zoom meeting, but we know that back in 2001, Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, in partnership with PDE, got this great work going, identifying research-based bullying prevention, enter in the Highmark Foundation and the partnerships with our folks. Some folks on the call might formerly know Center for Health Promotion, Disease Prevention, CHIPDIP, as Winber Research Institute, and the Center for Safe Schools. And then it fast forwards to 2017, and who knew, right? We would be a decade and a half into this work, and we're really challenged looking at what are the outcomes of this work of over 15 years. I think everyone on this call is involved in data-driven decision-making, and I certainly don't put myself out there as a statistician. I think my father-in-law, who has gone before us, he was a professor at Elizabethtown College in mathematics, and I think he would get a kick out of the fact that I have to speak the language so often of data, but he used to say not to be afraid of the numbers, and I really have taken that on because everyone on this call is driven by the data, and it's really a challenge that we have. So I wanted to take a quick look at some of the current data sources we have that helps us look at the current state of bullying prevention in Pennsylvania. And then certainly I want to have a discussion about this. One of our data points is our going into our third year, right? Carla Joyce Good, who is the first person that you get when you answer the Pennsylvania Bullying Prevention consultation line. We had over 240 calls last year, which gives us some data on more of the severe incidents, because certainly if you're Googling your way to help, those situations are very complex. The SAP data continues to collect bullying prevention information. It now breaks it down into whether the person was a target of bullying or a perpetrator, because when you just click bullying as the reason they got into the SAP system, you really didn't know which end. The Safe Schools annual report, as you know, schools are required to report incidences of violence and weapons. It used to be the Violence and Weapons Report. And through the legislation in 2008, need to add bullying instances. We know that this is really underreported. It's a frustration that I think everyone shares, but you're required to say how many incidents of bullying in your school, which can sometimes be 0. We have Jeff on the call. The Pennsylvania Youth Survey, we know, gets into specific questions about bullying, and although schools are not required to do the PAYS survey, Jeff, not to put you on the spot, I don't know if you could give us a number of approximately how many schools are participating in PAYS recently?
Yeah, we are in the midst of the 2017 administration. We started on September 11th, and schools can administer anytime up until Thanksgiving. Currently, we have 377 of our 499 districts.
Wow, okay.
That's up from 356 last year. The only downside is we still do not have Philadelphia or Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And then there are about 40, last I looked, about 45 what we call other schools, privates, charters, cybers, or parochial.
Okay, and I think this is a beautiful example of our partnership, and Dr. Stephen Leff, if you haven't connected with Jeff Colchin, we could make that connection, because Steve does live in the world of Philadelphia, and that might be something that you two want to talk further about.
Great. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jeff. The Pennsylvania School Climate Survey, I don't think Pam is on the call. Stacy, Pam, Emery, you haven't joined us, have you? Don't think she was. Stacy, if you want to say a quick word about what we're peeking at with the Boolean data through the Pennsylvania School Climate Survey.
Sure. The PA School Climate Survey is being administered to 83 schools as part of the Pennsylvania School Climate Leadership Initiative this year, but there are many more schools that take it voluntarily. It's an online tool administered to students, teachers, community partners, and parents. And it reports out in 4 domains. One of those domains is social emotional learning, which is where bullying issues fall. And what we know from our first statewide analyses of that data is that our secondary schools, the greatest area of need is the area of social and emotional learning. The second greatest area is academic rigor. In our elementary schools, SEL, or social emotional learning, also came up as our one area of relative weakness in all grades except 5th grade.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. And the Pennsylvania School Climate Surveys, similar to the PACE surveys, are voluntary in nature. Schools do not have to take those surveys unless sometimes required with a grant. The Safe Schools Initiative grant is another data point. This is very interesting, and actually I'm very glad that we don't just hang our hat on that data point to look at whether we should continue to fund and support bullying prevention. Just a little bit of background information, the Safe Schools Initiative grant 2015-16, there were 14 program grants awarded and only 3 involved bullying prevention. So that's out of all our LEAs and our charters. The 2016-17 Safe Schools Initiative grant, 16 program-related grants were awarded, and only 2 are bullying prevention related. But what's most telling is only 40 completed the grant applications for programs, even going for the funding, and only 4 requested bullying prevention. So the 2 that were not rewarded, of course, had to do with the just the nature of their grant application. But if you look at only 4 schools throughout Pennsylvania requested funding for bullying prevention, it leaves us to ponder how to use that particular data point. The Pennsylvania School Principal Survey 2012 and 2016, we'll be looking at some quick graphs about that information. Back in 2012, we asked deep questions about if you had implemented the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program to continue with the survey, and we received some very specific information about the challenges that really would not surprise anyone that had to do with funding and time and things like that. But we also continue to turn to the schools to ask them what they need, and we'll talk about some of those outcomes of the 2016. Leah, not to put you on the spot, because you might not have this report in front of you, and I know Stacy was involved in this work, but recently the Center for Safe Schools did reach out to the network to take a look at some of the needs of bullying prevention. If you don't have that information handy, we can get that to everyone, but Leah or Stacy, can you speak to that?
Sorry, I took a second for me to unmute.
Sure, no problem, Leah.
I'm sorry, Mary, I don't have that information in front of me, but we can compile a summary and send out to the group.
Okay, that's fantastic. Stacy, do you have a word to say about that?
All I can say is that I do know that the survey went out to individual or leaders of schools that had received the PA Cares grant. And it was asking them both sort of survey-style questions and open-ended questions about their current bullying prevention needs and the changes that resulted from their engagement in PA Cares, which is in essence the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program. I believe that there were about 40 respondents out of a possible 200, so it's a small group, but you also have to remember that there's also often a good deal of administrative turnover And you'd certainly want those folks who were involved in the initiative to be the ones that were responding. So I think that folks will find the results of those interesting. I believe that there were some positive findings with regard to the continuation of many of the practices, the best practices that are represented within the Olveus program in many schools. So I think that that would be worth us taking a look at in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions, correct me if I'm wrong, were targeted at what we need for the future, Stacy, correct?
Moving forward.
Right.
I think there's both. I think there's both. So I only had access to the data through some conversations with folks at the center, so I don't want to misrepresent it. I'm sure that Leah can get a better representation of it for us for the next time.
Okay, that would be fantastic. And you know, I did not, our colleagues at CHIP-DIP, Center for Health Promotion Disease Prevention, I did not actually list you as a data source in the sense I was trying to pull out what current data do we have about the needs of bullying prevention. But if you all could just take just a word about, obviously you did so much work about data collection during the HALT initiative, especially for our new partners on the phone. If you could just say a word about your role in data collection.
Well, as well as the Center for Safe Schools, we had the opportunity to be collectors primarily, analysts to a much smaller degree in the largest implementation of the Olveus program. And with that, and I know Stacy can talk about some of the ancillary data that we collected, we have a unique sense, I think, of a lot of qualitative notions about implementation and school-based bullying prevention. So some of that has been published. Some of it rests with Sue Limber at Clemson and Dr. Olveus himself, who ultimately, owned the data because we used the Olveus survey. And if I'm not mistaken, and Jane can clarify this, some of it has been published and some of it is perhaps on its way to being published. But we certainly, in those 7 years of earnest data collection, learned a lot about school-based implementation of bullying prevention, not just the Olveus program. And it has led us down several paths as far as what comes next in the community after schools have implemented over a long time. We've developed a niche, I think, with pediatric screening of bullying prevention. We've done some pilots here in the western part of the state and in Reading as well, with implementing a survey in pediatricians' offices. We are currently sort of partnering with one of the IUs to pilot an app that would reach out to parents and help them be a little more informed when their children are perhaps victims of cyberbullying. So it's taken us in many different directions. And there are many things that, we could be in discussion about.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. And I think, and some of the rich reports still do exist online, like your cost-benefit analysis, of bullying prevention. I think, when we look at why are we even talking about data, in the sense of, I'm sure, almost everyone on this phone, every time you seek funding or you justify your initiatives, you back it with the data to support the need. And that's one of the challenges that we have. I know, Jeff, if you want to say a word about the tools that have been developed, the Pennsylvania Youth Survey gives you such rich information, and as many of these surveys do, yet if we don't have the tools for schools to use that data to make decisions, it becomes numbers. So Jeff, I don't know if you want to say a word about that, because I know you've been on that journey for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the things we started. I've been involved since '09, pretty much since my office got involved with the survey. Was the problem of schools doing the survey, getting the report, and then sticking it on the shelf and not doing anything with the actual results. So what we did, I believe, for the 2013 administration, is we developed a guide and a workbook we called it for busy school officials at the time, with the idea being is it would guide school data teams through the report, kind of provide some advice and assistance and what they should be looking for, and then how do they, once they've done that analysis, how do they use it to take action? Either making policy changes for school climate issues, or selection of programs to address some of the underlying risk factors or other data that jumped out as part of that analysis. So that is out on the PAYS website.
Okay.
It's under the 2015 section, and we'll be updating that for 2017.
Oh, fantastic, Jeff. And Steve, Dr. Leff, if you were to say a word about some of the data collection that you've done in the Philadelphia area.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. Yes, I mean, we've done, as I've been listening, we've done a number of different data collections. We have, at the hospital, across primary care practice, we actually been doing screenings for bullying prevention for the pediatricians with some resources and handouts. One of the ways in which we've been collecting data. Another one, in a study, a dissemination study that you referenced before, Mary, our Free to Be study, which is where we actually go into schools, middle schools, and gather very brief data through interactive handhelds, show them, the kids, an educational show on bullying prevention, and collect some more data. We've been using the data from that to generate school action plans, so very similar to the way in which the PA Youth Survey was described. So those are some of the main data points that we have. We've also done some more intensive interventions and have data specific to those.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And, you know, I think that, you know, when we get down to it, there's no one on this call that doesn't feel there's still a need for bullying prevention programming and support and resources. Yeah, you can just see with this list, and I think we could probably have our whole meeting just talking about data and how to use it, that we certainly are challenged that when any of us are asked, so why should this be funded, or why should a funding partner come at the table, or if we apply for a new grant, you know, what data do you have? Where is the proof in the pudding? I'm wondering if any of our folks, Heidi or Geraldine from the LEAs, want to say a word about how these data points on bullying prevention look in your real world of the school districts.
Geraldine, you want to go first?
Heidi, go ahead. I think we got you.
Okay. Well, we have now in our district for 2 years, we've given the EDSCLS, the federal survey from Safe and Supportive Learning. So we have 2 years of data. And last year we were fortunate enough to have a Safe School Initiative Target Grant. So we used the year to compare the data from the first year of the survey, the second, and put a plan into place on how we would make the data actionable. So this is our first year of working with the plan, and we have 3 middle schools. In middle school, our plan was to create an advisory program because we saw a weakness in relationships between staff and students across the 3 middle level buildings, with the idea that if they felt better supported, then they would interact with each other in a way that was supportive because we'd be modeling it. So we're right now creating the advisory program that we're going to use in our district. And that was one of the outcomes of the data, of school climate data.
Well, and could you repeat the name of the survey again, Heidi?
It's the EDSCLS. It's
EDSCLS. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
It's Safe and Supportive Learning. So it's a federal free survey.
Okay. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much. And I think that's a great example where, you know, you are using a strategic planning framework that's driven by your data that you find. Geraldine, do you have anything to add?
Just one of the things we made sure to do, Mary, was to make sure that we use the surveys, any surveys we've taken, any information, to share it with teachers and students at class meetings, so that sometimes there's a lot of information that we know, but the students and teachers actually don't know it, or staff. So in our class meetings and any meetings that we have a diversity committee, we've presented that information so that everybody's aware of what's going on.
And what type of survey tool did you utilize?
Well, during the class meetings, they've done a couple of surveys on our own, like a CV survey. And then they've done some of the surveys you've talked about. And also, when we got the grant, we did Oveus surveys. We shared all those with staff and students.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to add anything as far as more of the quantitative data side before we move to the next slide? Okay. As we know, for those of us that are very 101 in statistics, we have to take a look at the qualitative side. And I think especially the folks on this call, because we live in this world of school climate improvement and bullying prevention, we have conference workshop discussions that turn into focus groups at times. You know, the many conversations and emails we have. Carla and I, work very closely about the helpline calls. And right, Carla, we say if we ever have a moment where we think that our work has an endpoint, the next call that comes in reminds us. Carla, if you want to say a word about that, I think that'd be fantastic.
Surely. Well, it's that time of year where calls are definitely picking up. October, things can get busy because students have been back in school for a while, and issues that were either ongoing from last year or have cropped up at the beginning of the school year, are now kind of reaching a bit of a tipping point. So we also always say, Mary, that when we just think we've heard it all, we hear something else that kind of tops what we previously thought was the most difficult or challenging. Or I hate to use the word interesting, but just something that we couldn't have thought of on our own. So we continue to get very complex calls. And I feel, Mary, and you can back me up or not, that we are just as we go, we continue to kind of refine our protocol and procedures and our decision tree and where we continue to find new supportive resources for the mostly the families that call the consultation line.
Right, and I think we've had such great feedback. Sometimes folks just want to be heard, but we really have had feedback about resolutions, and it gives us opportunity to talk to the districts. 99.9% of the time, the parents want us to call the school and move everyone forward to solutions. And I would just say that those calls really typify like what's in the news. And if you're wondering how cyberbullying plays out, Carla and I can give a case study scenario that show it's also real. So that part has also helped connect us deeper internally here with Juanita, the Bureau of Special Education, as so many of the calls we ask, obviously not on the first sentence, but within our interview, so to speak, we ask if the child has an IEP. And an alarming number of students have an IEP, but interesting enough, have really not been bullied from the parents' perspective or the school's perspective because of their disability, but yet we'd have a child with an IEP who's no longer coming to school because they don't feel safe. And Juanita, if you want to say a word about that, that would be fantastic.
Yes, there are high instances of students who get bullied because of have disabilities. And it's really, really difficult. The parents have a hard time handling it. They don't know if the student is actually being bullied or if this is something that they just made up. Then the school district has a hard time because they don't know how to handle kids who have disabilities who get bullied, because a lot of these kids are victims, and they have this physical, they look different, they walk different, they talk different, and a lot of times the perception for students with disabilities is off. And this is a really difficult area to handle. Actually, I just got a call 2 days ago about one student who was bullied, but the parent didn't know how to handle it. The school doesn't know how to handle it. And we don't know if these kids are actually victims or are they acting out this is part of their disability and this is just how it is. So it's difficult to handle.
Thank you, Juanita. And, I think the piece that has been very interesting, and I think the scenarios that you're sharing, Juanita, are so relevant to what I was saying, to actually clarify that when I say the parents don't see their child necessarily as being bullied because of their disability, nor the school, it just might not be kind of so overt in that's what is really underlining it and mixing into the whole scenario. But as you dig deeper, yes, it is. It could be because of their social skills, or just their anger or anxieties, or many different issues. I just spent the day in Lancaster yesterday at the Exceptional Children's Conference put on by the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and it was very, very interesting to hear the perspective of the lawyers take both sides, parent advocate and school district attorneys and so on, talking about protecting the rights of exceptional children in our schools. And when they talked about the recent cases, and I live with lots of lawyers, but I'm not an attorney, but when they were journeying down the lane in all the legal jargon, what you were really pulling apart was circumstances that surround a scenario of a child not coming to school, being disciplined, that has an IEP in the relation to FAPE. And so, when people were saying, okay, our kids aren't coming to school because they're being bullied, and then they have an IEP, and you ask the district, so have you reconvened with an IEP meeting? And they're not even thinking of that as a tool. And I'm certainly, Geraldine and Heidi, not saying that every LEA reacts that way, but we've had a high volume of calls when it involved an IEP, and we talked to the school district side, where the school district is just saying, and they've listed the 25 things they've done to stop the bullying, but it still hasn't. But they haven't utilized the tools and the requirements within special education. So we're working hard to get that connect. We're working on a webinar, and this is actually the topic that Juanita and Jim are presenting on at the IBPA conference, is special education and bullying prevention. So
one other thing, Mary, is that
sure.
the kids with IEPs that have disabilities really cannot advocate for themselves. They
Yes.
really don't have the skills, sometimes the verbal language, the ability to do that because of their disability. And they'll need someone in the building, in the school, to assist in that.
Right. And as soon as we know the parent needs support in that arena, Carla and I provide the special education advocate helpline immediately. And that seems to be, the great connect to get that advocate at their side. So, of course, and then, the other qualitative data in the news, the reports of bullying in Pennsylvania nationally, continue. So although sometimes, it's hard to come up with statistics, we have all these different data sources that continue to support that there's still a need for bullying prevention, for your late night reading enjoyment, the Preventing Bullying Through Science Policy and Practice publication. I attended the research symposium last year at the International Bullying Prevention Association, and I put this quote from this study in our invitation for today, because especially us oldie goldies here, are seasoned bullying prevention folks on the phone, it's kind of mind-boggling. And it's interesting, though, when you look at the latest findings really continue to support what we knew in 2001. And quote, the most effective bullying prevention programs are whole school, multi-component programs that combine elements of universal and targeted strategies. So who knew? So here we are still circling back around and saying that, okay, although we have the data that supports why schools, and understandably so, get frustrated with the barriers of comprehensive work, and sometimes have turned to assemblies and things like that, research still continues to support what we knew back in 2001. A couple other school climate initiatives that are going on in Pennsylvania continue to support the work of school climate improvement, positive behavior intervention support, the School Climate Regional Coordinators Project. And Stacy, if you would just take a moment to say a word about how this work connects with bullying prevention.
Well, I think I mentioned it a bit previously, and so I won't take up a lot of time. Again, we're doing, one of the components of the initiative is engaging schools in collecting school climate data, which is perceptions of climate and various aspects of climate from students, teachers, parents, and community partners. The importance of collecting those perceptions is that we often rely on data that is quite malleable in terms of, office disciplinary referrals. We can adjust those relatively easily by sort of changing some policies or some practices that are pretty technical things. However, to change students' feelings and perceptions of whether their teachers are supportive of them, care about them, whether students in their school can solve problems, whether they feel safe, those are a little more complex. And so we think that it's important to utilize that perceptual data along with our office disciplinary referrals and other types of data to really understand what students' experiences are so that we can engage in some multi-level change efforts. Right now we have 27 of the 29 intermediate units participating. In each IU there's at least one, sometimes two, people being trained by the National School Climate Center to be school climate leaders. These folks are really changed in the process of helping schools go through a careful examination of their climate and commit to making changes in that climate. And so of those 27 folks, about 80% of them will be certified by the National School Climate Center at the end of this year, probably more like 90%, 85 to 90%, and will be able to practice independently in supporting schools with this initiative. Dovetails nicely with PBIS because we know that PBIS is also a multi-tiered approach, and many of the initial strategies that are implemented when a school engages in PBIS can be effective in moving particularly the safety domain of the PA School Climate Survey. So we're really looking at those connections now. I think that that's probably it. Again, the connections to bullying prevention, or they give us another opportunity to shine the light on this data around how safe students feel and the nature of their relationships in the school.
Thanks, Stacy. And I think the real specific connect too with bullying prevention is as they take the school climate surveys, the Pennsylvania School Climate Surveys, and bullying is identified as one of their main needs. It rises to the top. And when they begin their action plan, as you all know, everyone on this call, when you're strategically planning for change and you start with that data point of bullying. So the next question becomes, what do we do? What's out there? What are best practices? And this is where we circle around and that, everyone on this call that is extremely familiar with research-based comprehensive approaches are never going to suggest just, one assembly on a Friday afternoon. So not that can't absolutely enhance the work that you do, Steve, not to take away from Free to Be, which we've had some great conversations about. And I appreciate, Dr. Leff, just the work that you've done and the understanding you have in comprehensive bullying prevention, that when we do add an assembly, it actually, supports the work rather than being seen as a one-time event. And I appreciate that your work from the beginning took that into consideration. Steve, I don't know if you're still on the call. Go ahead.
I am. And I think the other really important point about it is you're right. Any assembly, no matter how good, only goes so far. I think the interesting way in which we use it is actually feeding the data back to schools based on having their kids excited, filling out information, and then helping, schools think about action plans to help improve school climate.
That's a good point. Thank you, Steve, because it does. The interactive assembly gives real-time data immediately about how the students feel, and it captures, right, Steve, a lot of bystander perception too.
Exactly, and that's one of the main pieces for such a brief experience, which is to really generate some bystander options and provide some data to schools on steps to help support bystanders.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. So I just want to take a quick look. I think these are interesting charts that come from our principal surveys in 2012 and 2016. And when asked what programs, approaches, and curricula do you utilize formally or informally in your school to build safe and secure learning environments, you can see from 4 years later that, bullying prevention is still up there as what they see. And bullying prevention, of course, is a broad statement as to what that actually might mean. But it was kind of interesting and kind of predictive, I think, that student assemblies bumped up above, because I think as schools shifted away from the comprehensive work, because the legislation in 2008 does require you to, quote, do something, student assemblies, really came up above. And I think that that's very interesting that occurred. When we asked what specific bullying prevention programs, approaches, and so on do you use in your building, it's interesting that PBIS is seen as bullying prevention. And, I think, we've done a lot of collaboration with the folks in PBIS. We know it's a school-wide, it's a climate, yet it doesn't necessarily drill down and address bullying prevention. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that you'll see, I think there was a logical gain in PBIS up to 2016 with the support. There's been a lot of support through Special Education Bureau and, federal dollars to support PBIS. And the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program, which, I think everyone knows that, no one ever intended to be about one program, but a comprehensive bullying prevention research-based program never really rose to the top like the Olveus program, and that's where Pennsylvania's history has been. So there has been some drop there, but yet it's very interesting because schools did try to hold on to that approach, I think, the best that they could. But I think that's kind of interesting. And in PA, when you look at the other list of what schools do, it really drops. It drops significantly from comprehensive approaches like PBIS and Olveus to, Second Step or PAS or, different clubs and so on. So I'd like to hear from our friends at Chip Dip for a moment about their school health spotlights as we're talking about some of the efforts that your agencies are doing. And some of the folks on the call have already been able to share, but I would love at this point, I'd like to start with Chip Dip for our participants to say a word about what your agency or organization is doing to support bullying prevention and or school climate improvement.
Thanks, Mary. Well, for a long time here in our region, we've been involved in coordinated school health and helping schools network with each other around topics, not only bullying prevention, but other topics that are important for health and safety of their students and families. And so something new that we embarked on this year is just a web series of continuing education sessions that have to do with pertinent topics for student health. So there are 8. Next year we will be adding more, but basically the nice part about them is they're concise 1-hour sessions that educators or school serving professionals can access anywhere 24 hours a day so that they can get an hour of Act 48 credit. There is one on meaningful bullying prevention, which is basically just a dictated version of what the IOM report, which was released, maybe going on 2 years ago. But that said, I know a lot of schools are doing good bullying prevention work that's left over from when they were trained maybe a year or 2 prior. So we wanted to have an easy way for them to touch base with what's relevant in the research now and sort of reaffirm or adjust what they're doing in their schools. So that's really the one that has to focus on bullying prevention. Sort of has a lot to do with the the National Institutes of Health report. The other topics, some of them are mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid, sexual health in adolescence, concussion prevention, LGBT and creating welcoming schools. So all sorts of things, not just bullying prevention, but that are related to the overall health and wellness of students.
Okay. Thank you. And I believe I sent out the announcement about the Schoolhouse Spotlights to the partnership. So Cheryl, just keep it coming, and I'll make sure that's forwarded to all our partners so they can forward out to the folks in their sectors.
Awesome, that's great. Yeah, we've been, the past week and a half, we've really been inundated with registrants, and it's
great
to see that. So.
Okay, that's good news. Okay, is there anyone who hasn't gotten to say a word about what their agency or organization is currently working on? And certainly, Jane Reese, we'd love to hear your perspective as to what the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program is working on, not just in Pennsylvania, but nationally, if you could say a word or two. So if anybody wants to jump in, that'd be great. And I will take notes.
Well, thank you, Mary. I appreciate being part of the partnership. I really do. You and I have had many wonderful conversations about the state of bullying and bullying prevention, not only here but in the U.S. So, one of the things before I talk about what we've been up to at Clemson, we certainly are.
Jane, could you pause for a moment and just introduce who you are? I just realized some partners that don't know you.
Well, yeah. Hey, everybody. I've been a part of the Olveus Bullying Prevention Program. In particular, I've had a focus on trainer certification processes since 1999. So I, like Mary, go back to the beginning. Many of you on this line go back to the beginning of some of these more systematized efforts in the state, and have been able to do that kind of from a more macro or national level, which has been a fascinating experience. So, wow, I still sit back hearing what everybody's saying and doing here in the Commonwealth, and it's just fascinating and very Pennsylvania proud, being in York, PA, now and all my life, to be part of this movement. And we've been leaders here in Pennsylvania across the country, and obviously that continues based on all the great efforts that you're doing. Because we have had such an Olveus focus in the state, and because we still have access to certainly a big commitment to supporting Pennsylvania in any way that we can, we invite as much input and information as we can get into what we could do to help people who have been, your 30-some, 40-some% of schools are saying they're using Olveus. What do they need to do Olveus well? What sort of, quality assurance, if you will, which is certainly born in Pennsylvania as a wonderful pilot and part of the Highmark movement. What do we need to do to support schools to do this, continue to do the work well? And as Cheryl said, many schools have had a great foundation and have made this their own in a variety of different ways, which is fantastic as well. And we're collecting data to show how these initiatives are working, even in the broader sense, as Stacy said, in terms of school climate overall. I'll say that I believe we have Abby Baylor from the Bureau of Family Health at the Pennsylvania Department of Ed on the line, and she was on the call anyway. And Abby may want to chime in here, but thanks to some great introductions that Mary Dolan made between the Olveus program and PA Department of Health, we're looking at a project that could bring more bullying prevention to non-school entities around the Commonwealth. That's all I'll say about it now, because it's been in the works for a year now, and we're hopeful that everything will come together so that we can bring the Pennsylvania Bullying Prevention Network of trainers in the fold to some opportunities for their communities. So that's sort of one thing in the works. Quickly, I have to hop off very shortly for my next thing, but quickly wanted to say that we're still full in on our project in South Carolina, funded by the National Institutes of Justice, where we are doing a combined intervention with Olveus and PBIS together. It's going strong, going well, and that's actually a call that I'm going to be getting on in a moment. Happy to talk with any of you offline about that. Oh my gosh, what can I say? There is, as I believe, Mary, you mentioned, and Cheryl too, some still working with the wonderful 7 years of Pennsylvania data collection. We have changed our trainer certification options for people so that we now have more remote, online, distant learning options, blended learning options for people. Yeah, the list goes on. And we have a newsletter. Any of you are welcome to go to clemson.edu/Olveus and sign up to receive our newsletter, which comes out 3 times a year. And that would be a really good way to keep posted about some of our efforts. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Jane. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that, and I think many folks on the phone are aware of this very deep foundation of work in comprehensive bullying prevention that does translate into our work with Olveus here in PA. And I'm hearing you say that, Clemson would like to know what we need.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, right? And I think that's, that's part, and the next slide is called, do we know what the schools need? So if you have to jump off, Jane, we will let you know what the schools need as we move forward to gather that information. But I think that's the kind of conversations that Jane and I have had the opportunity to have, is that, I certainly think I can say this here at the Office for Safe Schools, that, no one here is against funding continued support for Olveus by any means, but we have to be able to justify the need. And when we only have a couple applicants through our Safe Schools initiative asking for support for Olveus, that data point does not justify a regional event. And I think that's, that's why we're having this call, so that we can, because we know that there's more need than that data point shows us. So to be continued, Jane Reese, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you,
We're glad
Mary.
you're in PA, and we're glad you're part of the partnership now.
Thank you.
Okay, you have a great day. Thanks a lot. Does anybody else want to chime in and that hasn't had a chance to highlight some of the efforts that your agency or organization is currently doing with bullying prevention or school climate improvement?
Hi, Mary. This is Tim Noster.
Hi, Tim.
Hey. Obviously, we're involved with the partnership things through the Community of Practice on School-Based Behavioral Health, supporting PBIS and the various endeavors that we overlap on. Probably the one thing that the McDowell Institute is doing that certainly aligns with, I'm not sure how unique it is to the people on the call, is our heavy emphasis on pre-service educator training. And the outreach that we're doing, not just here on our campus through the McDowell Institute, in our College of Ed and our College of School Social Work, but actually partnering with a number of institutions of higher ed that have educator prep programs across the Commonwealth to put in place a number of evidence-based programs. Our initial launch has been in youth mental health first aid, but we're also sharing with them additional virtual online training materials and things that we've been partnering or leveraging to share with folks. So a heavy emphasis on kind of working upstream with educator training.
That's fantastic, Tim. And I think that's a good example of, like, making sure that it's fantastic that you're part of the partnership, and that the health spotlights from CHIP-DIP, are fantastic webinars for our future teachers, and certainly how any of the work that we can do helps support our future teachers in bullying prevention, and that you're creating such amazing models for other higher ed to duplicate. So as you get off this call and some of the things that you've heard, please reach out. And if there's anyone, you want to get directly connected with to see how that type of education, could connect with your future teachers, I think that'd be a logical connect.
Thanks, Mary.
Sure. Anybody else want to add what your agency or organization is doing specific to bullying prevention or school climate improvement? Okay. All right. Okay, let's head on to the next slide. So, really, this is, let me just take a back look here. Okay. When we look at, this is the basic question that we're asking. The very important question that we're asking is, do we know what the schools need? And you know, we certainly do have some data points to pull from to help justify our continued support. Not when I say ours, not just the Office for Safe Schools. But, you know, throughout your agency and organization's planning purposes. But I think, you know, we have to really take a look at, and I'd like to have a little bit of discussion on this, and thank you everyone for hanging in on the call. You know, I mean, I sit here and you know, I of course formulate my list of what I feel that we need to know here at the Department of Ed, but I'd love to have some open discussion, and I'll take some notes here on, you know, what is it that we want to know? What are we trying to even find out? Does anybody want to chime in?
I think that one thing, this isn't the sort of overarching question, but maybe it'll help us get to it. This is Stacy. I think one thing that we want to know is what are they struggling with regard to, what are schools struggling with regard to bullying prevention? I mean, historically, we know that, you know, defining it was sometimes an issue, dealing with the frequent flyers, you know, kids that were very involved in bullying behavior or easy targets of bullying behavior, the students that demonstrate both bullying and victim characteristics. We know historically that those were sort of issues. Is that the same thing that we're experiencing now, or have schools' struggles shifted a little bit?
Okay, I think that's a great question, Stacy. Okay, thank you. What else do we want to know?
This is Cheryl. I think something important that we could seek to find out has to do with the data that we're getting from the consultation line, and how we can use that to make sure the people who need it are getting more pointed technical assistance. So I know in a general sense, some of the resources and information we put out there are sort of fruit hanging on a tree waiting to be picked, but if we could sort of be able to package up something and give it to a district or a school where we know there is a need.
Okay.
It seems like we're not always focused on that. And I know that's maybe percentage-wise, you know, less of an impact. But it seems to me like that's, you know, here we are 15 years into this, and there are still people who need bullying prevention 101 types of information. And their lack of knowledge about those sorts of things are leading to significant stress sometimes where there's a call to the hotline. So
right.
It seems like our great work in general is not being sifted through to specific targets, if that's making any sense. I'm not sure.
It does, Cheryl, and I think that what Carla and I have had opportunity to talk about is how the data, so to speak, that comes in from the bullying prevention consultation line is a study in and of itself of lots of data that can be disaggregated to take a look at, you know, what, you know, is cyberbullying in every theme, you know, special education in every theme, is you know, local law enforcement's role in every theme. When we talk to the schools, what are the common themes there? And we're actually looking at a program that I think we'll be able to roll. You know, things were on hold because of the budget, but Hipster is a online database that is going to be customized for however we want that to be, to capture everything that you're talking about, so that, you know, and you, like you said, these are the more radical cases, but they do kind of cross every area of bullying prevention you can possibly imagine, to be able to take a look at the different key points, right, that come in from there to say what do these parents need, what do the schools need. I think that's great. I think that's great. Anybody? Yep. Go ahead, Deb.
This is Deb Gadsden. I think what I would want to know is how much is bullying behavior occurring among the adult staff in the schools that then prevents them from being able to adequately pay attention to the bullying that's going on in the school population. You know, I've been doing a lot of work around workplace bullying, and
Yes.
we know from the research that's been done in that arena that health facilities and schools are the hotbeds for workplace bullying. So, you know, what needs to be done in that realm, and is what's going on from that perspective preventing adults from dealing with what's going on with kids.
Okay, thank you, Deb. So it's that reminder that what we also want to know is how is the entire climate, including the adults, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Hey,
Anybody
Mary, Mary, this is Leah.
Hi, Leah.
I think one of the things that I want to know, or maybe it's just me, maybe everybody wants to know or not, is how to build connections. And I mean that actually in two different ways. How do we build connections between students and staff? Because we know from our research that that connection to one person at school is key in helping that student navigate school, navigate any bullying situations, you know, navigating, you know, just relationships in general.
Okay.
So how do we do that? But the other half of that is how do we build connections between and among schools so that they can talk to their peers about what they're doing that's successful, what they're doing that maybe they're struggling with, and can reach out to another school to see what they're doing. And this is just from my own, you know, site visits and personal observations in schools, is they want to talk to somebody who's going through the same process that they're going through.
Right.
So how do we build those connections between our students and our teachers and our staff, all of our staff, not just the teachers, but how do we build those connections among schools across, you know, across the state?
Okay, I think that's fantastic. Does anybody from the LEAs want to jump in and talk about that? I don't know if Heidi had to go or Geraldine.
Hi, this is Silky. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm from Patton, and I'm filling in for Jim at the moment. But this has been wonderful and awesome. But I'm thinking about, just to follow up what Leah said, and also to back on what Tim Noster is really focusing on, which is preparation of teachers in the field, before the field. When I look at like our Patton training menu, and let's just talk about the training that we do for principals, we do feature like 2 slides out of like a training that is bullying prevention. And what is missing, like given what I just was a part of and listening and to everybody speak, and even looking at the Safe Schools website and all the materials that's there, but what is missing and what would be helpful in just principals is a really concise case study talking about comprehensive bullying, for comprehensive anything, like any approach, problem solving, but then grounded in bully prevention. So here's the study. Here's a principal who used this data, who then had this team, and these were the options they came up with. This is the action they took, but grounded in bully prevention scenario. Something like that at Patton and anywhere else, of course, that they could take that case study and embed in the training that we're doing with principals. And when we're out in the field supporting principals or any district that's working with either school mental health, school behavioral health, or any, you know, school climate prevention surveys, that we would have a case study that we could turn to for principals who are just not experienced in, one, the arena of like the problem solving cycle, and 2, like comprehensive programming and thinking long term and short term for what they have ahead of them.
Right. I appreciate that. And I think, you know, it's one of the pieces, it's the reminder that if we are shouting from the rooftops, don't count on a one-time event to be your bullying prevention. So then the next question is, so then if not that, then what? And I think, you know, that's what we do have a lot of, we have a lot of schools that really are the case studies that really did take this comprehensive work forward, and they might like call it Olveus anymore, but they have this rich comprehensive work in their school as part of their climate and the culture of what they do. I think that's a great suggestion. Go ahead.
One of the things at the building and school level is teachers are required to do so much these days that when bullying prevention is on the list. It's one of the first things to go because people assume that it's common sense, don't bully, don't do it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think if we could link, and I think I've said this before, I'm a behavior specialist, and I know when you talk about behavior, if we could link bullying behavior more with functional behavior assessments and the impact it does have on special education students and link it to behavior, I think people would put more time and energy into making it important and put it on the list for what teachers need to include in their trainings. Because I really do think the bullying prevention part is the part that people assume they know, and they think, you know, but if you link it to behavior, I think behavior is an important thing for teachers, and then they do want to come and learn about it.
Right, and I think that's why we keep connecting it with climate.
Right.
Because you know, I think in Pennsylvania, the kind of catch-22 that we've had about doing so much work in bullying prevention is people were getting tired of hearing the word. And you know, they're like, we've done that, and so on. And you know, we do have the reality that, and I think I've forwarded to our partnership many times, but it's on our website, and I'll forward it again. But the 4-star document that came out of a lot of work with the Highmark Foundation support, you know, really shows that, you know, you don't get a star designation in Pennsylvania, but you only have to be a 1-star school in PA, which means you meet the legislation. And really, when you move up into what is a 4-star school, they are doing research-based comprehensive work, which they, quote, don't have to do. And I think that continues to be a challenge that we have, that as we keep shouting from the rooftops, you know, what research, it goes back to the slide about what the current research is still saying, is really more the 4-star type of school where they, you know, integrate all this work into a tiered model and connect it with, like you said, behavior, with climate, and all of these pieces. So I know here at the department, you know, we just, you know, we really kind of spent last year kind of recircling around and just saying that, okay, you know, at the risk of sounding like we're about one program, you know, we still have to look at the Olweus Foundation that we have here, and we need to look at, you know, that today that still is a program that really addresses, you know, all the components, and we're always open to other approaches that do the same thing.
Mary, can I add something, because I don't want to lose what you said. I think that one, you know, trying to combine what Silke and what you just said, Mary, you know, if I don't think that the 4-star document is that well disseminated, although it's really a powerful piece of work.
I agree.
So I think a next step might be to disseminate it, but another might be to think about these case studies through the lens of the 4-star document and trying to link that with the problem-solving model that the folks who are engaged in PBIS or patents trainees are using. So maybe, you know, a combination of case study with that problem-solving model. And I don't know, Silke, do you have a common problem-solving model that you're encouraging people to use? Is it the PBIS team-based model?
We typically do, you know, the Plan, Do, Study, Act, the multi-tiered systems of support, the same one that's offered in the NERN. They're usually the same. But yeah, in the PBIS model, it is, you know, the 4 stages of problem solving.
Yeah, would you mind sending the group sort of something that would summarize that for us so that we could, you know, think about maybe some synergies here?
Sure.
The other thing that I was thinking, I heard you, Geraldine, talk about connecting to behavior, and I think that you're a behavioral specialist so that you know what that means, but it would be really helpful for me and maybe others for you to flesh that out. Like, what would that look like if the state were to connect bullying to behavior? Would it mean that we're, I don't know. What does that mean to you?
Well, for example, when we do functional behavior assessments for behavior with students with behavior difficulties, you know, we're looking for what are they trying to gain, escape, or avoid. If that was part of the functional behavior assessment, the whole bullying prevention, either students who are doing bullying behavior, what are they trying to gain, escape, or avoid? And then, as part of the functional behavior interview, I know I do those with individual students. One of the first questions on the interview is, are you being bullied? Have you participated in it? You know, those kind of things. I think if you can include it with behavior, when teachers hear behavior and principals hear behavior, that's what makes them pay attention. I think a lot of people think of bullying behavior as fluff and school climate as, you know, it'd be great if everybody was respectful and got along, but we need to get these scores up. We need to, you know, concentrate on academics. But if you link it to behavior, people listen and pay attention.
So let me push a little bit on this idea of linking to behavior. Would you see this being like a training module that looks at bullying through the lens of a functional behavior assessment and interview?
Yes, and I can see it on the added to the pyramid. I mean, I know a lot of people do put, you know, with there's a behavior side of the pyramid, but I think we strategically should add it to the PBIS pyramid and add it to the functional behavior assessment model or system. I'm sorry, procedure.
And Tim, is that something that's of interest to you? Does that make sense?
No, that does make sense. You just have to frame it within, obviously, the functional behavior assessment process. There might be some differing schools of thoughts over what's the function of quote unquote bullying behavior, because bullying behavior is not operationalized per se as it is.
Right. And that's why I think it would be important to put it on there so that we can dig deeper and find out what is the function.
I would agree. And then, you know, your other area of, you know, and these are just nuanced differences in terms of depending on what people perceive as the function of the perpetrator of the bullying behavior might be. A common thing people might gravitate to is power and control. And there are differences of perspective of, is that a legitimate function in the behavioral arena or not? So, but I mean, I think these are all things that can be navigated, and the short answer is yes. I think it makes absolute sense to view it through the lens of functional behavior assessment.
Well, and Stacy, to answer, you know, to continue with that, I think a big part of it then too would be the interventions that we put in place at each level. You know, instead of consequences, teaching. I know some of the students that we've had difficulty with, we have them look at videos and answer questions. We've had them do reflection pieces about their own behavior. We've had them read, and then, you know, they have to pass a certain score to show that they know what we're trying to teach them. So I think an important part of putting it on the pyramid and adding bullying prevention to behavior would be, I think it's the most important part, would be the interventions we put in place to teach that student, rather than just give consequences, to teach them what do they need to do to behave differently. But I just think,
you know, and I think
very important.
Oh, go ahead.
I just
and Geraldine, I think that would be so concrete and powerful. I mean, I think for years we've been saying, you know, what does tier 2 and tier 3 look like in cases of bullying, right? And on one hand, we can probably disaggregate the behaviors that students are exhibiting, or the skill deficits or whatever, and think about, you know, an evidence-based skill building program. However, I'm not really aware of a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 programs that look at those evidence-based skill needs and add on top of it something explicitly about bullying, so that there's a clear connection, you know, between the intervention that the students getting and the type of you know, misbehavior, whatever you want to call it. So I think that would be really a cool thing to look at too. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, that's what, when we look at behavior though, one of the first things we say to people is you can't give consequences unless you teach. And so, you know, we don't really do that with bullying prevention sometimes. I think it would be really important. It would be great if we could put some interventions, specific center type interventions, reading, you know, things like that, that are part of a student's behavior plan.
And I think it's a nice segue into social emotional learning.
Yes.
And you know, what do the schools need in regard to social emotional learning? And we know that although the SEL type of standards in Pennsylvania are pre-K through second grade, really through the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, we know that the standards, social emotional learning type standards in PA are moving more toward college and career readiness. And you know, so I think, you know, that brings in the whole population of the school. So I think that as schools move in that direction too, you know, that might be something that, you know, we also want to know. what do they need in relation to social emotional learning support, and which in old terms, character education and so on. But I think that's another piece as well. Okay, let's just kind of jump down through a couple other pieces. I think there's no endpoint to the question, how do we assess the needs of the schools? We've tried through our survey, our principals survey, which I think we've really, gotten a nice cross-section representative answers that help us take a look throughout the state, but it certainly is just, one tool that we've used. And I am really just wondering, from our partners' perspective, like how else can we actually assess the needs? One way we do it is through our partnership, because, you're coming from so many different sectors, and that's very, very helpful in us knowing and justifying the needs of the schools and families. But is there anything else that we can take a look at, or from your agencies and organizations' eyes and perspective, how can we more accurately assess the needs of the schools? Anybody want to take that one on? Is it always a survey? I mean, what's your thoughts? I mean, I think we're all in a position that, I feel doesn't take you as far as some really concrete ways of assessing the needs. So,
Mary, I'm not sure how this would take place, but hearing from the students themselves, not in a survey, but I know some of the most important information I get is when I get a group of students together, like with our ITO meetings and, big group meetings. I know I've gotten together some African-American students to hear what's going on with them, those kind of things.
Okay.
You're right from the students themselves, like panels with students and things like that. I'm not sure how you would do it, but.
Right, and I think I think all the partners, we can take a look at how do we get to the kids, to ask.
And, I think from a school climate perspective, that is a strategy that we are recommending, is doing focus groups with students to help to understand the data, because oftentimes we look at data in one or two dimensions, and assume that we as adults are reading it appropriately, when in fact there's often other information that feeds into why that data might look the way it looks. And so the challenge that we have is that the National School Climate Center hasn't provided us a student focus group model or two. So that's a potential way to assess needs. But the question is, how do you best do that when you're engaging students in these conversations that might be somewhat sensitive?
Right. Jeff, are you still on the call?
I am.
Jeff, I think the PAYS is probably one of the most widespread administered surveys that really captures needs of youth in Pennsylvania. How do you see that, the results of the PAYS statewide or even local levels, helping to answer this question, what do the schools need?
Well, I think it's the student's perspective of the level of bullying, as well as the reasons for bullying, can provide a lot of information for schools at a local level.
Okay.
Additionally, the one question that I thought was kind of eye-opening was the low percentage of students reporting that adults step in to stop bullying when it's reported.
Okay.
I think that's an area for improvement in, for both school climate and to reduce bullying. So I think that's an area that I think could be brought to the attention of administrators to a greater level.
So maybe, Jeff, what we could do is take some time to really tear apart the bully prevention data that you have, and decide, what do we do with that? Like, in the sense of, how does it help align, so this is what the needs seem to be, and then our next steps in supportive resources. Who at the table here can help align resources to help address that need, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Mary, I have an idea, a thought. I don't know if it could happen because we have a lot on our plate as compliance monitors for the state.
Okay.
But we do a survey of teachers, parents, and students when we go in to do compliance monitoring, cyclical monitoring. And I don't know if this is possible, but maybe we can add 1 or 2 questions about being safe in school or about bullying and get that added to the data that we collect for students with disabilities.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's possible, but I was just thinking about that.
Okay. Okay. Let's have a conversation about that and how we can support that. That's fantastic. Okay. Is there anything else that anyone's thinking about? I know, Joe's not on the call, but when we look at the SAP data, are the schools utilizing that data? I mean, there's some real serious needs assessments going on, so to speak, through capturing, what has actually occurred in schools. But I think that's part of it too, is it's not just about beginning to do needs assessments. There's a lot that's already occurring that we discussed earlier, and how does our partnership help the schools utilize that data? I know PBIS, if anybody wants to speak in the sense, that's a big part of PBIS, right, is utilizing the data.
Yeah, Mary, this is Silky. I know that I'm seeing a lot of evidence of the use of restorative practices to use those notes that are taken throughout those restorative circles and between staff and students on all tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Those notes on a local level, like to a building or even to a district. Okay. I know that there's use of those notes to determine the frequency of bullying and then to action plan. I can only say that I've seen evidence of that, certainly in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. Okay. And in several of the other school districts I've encountered just on the West, but definitely worth exploring. I'm not sure what this looks like in the rest of the state. I haven't had an opportunity to talk about this, with any of my colleagues or even with anyone in the Bureau to see that practice. And while I don't know, and I'd be curious to know, not sure that we can declare it, or if it has been, and maybe Tim might have more to say about this if it's evidence-based, or I know that there's a lot of money put into grants to establish a foundation of evidence to see the impact of restorative practices. But that is one way that I see building assessing need is qualitatively through the notes that they gain out of those restorative practice circles.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's a good connect as well. Okay.
It's Cheryl. I was wondering if there was anything that we could do further on the tail end of the consultation line calls.
Okay, such as?
I don't know, because in one sense, I feel like I don't want the district to feel on the spot or targeted just because a parent or family has made a call for us. There could be a lot of reasons that the call ends up being made. It might not, be a total systemic failure on the part of the district. It just might be one bump in the road happen. But I feel like if there was a way where we could reach back around to the district that was involved after a call, in a non-threatening way. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because that's obviously something happened. There was a disconnect that made them take that unusual step of calling on line.
I think that's a great suggestion, and Carla, if you want to say anything about this too, but my experience has been the schools. I mean, once they realize that this is not some type of official report, that we're here to be supportive and move everyone to solutions. I find the schools to be very transparent. I mean, I find the schools to say, please help us. We've tried X, Y, and Z, and we want to do the right thing. And, I think there's been so much learning done in Pennsylvania that the school climate matters. I think we're past that. But I think when it gets down to how do I improve things, please help me. And that's really what I found. Carla, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, Mary, that schools are typically, more than responsive to our, supportive resources. And, when we call a school, it is never in any way a disciplinary call. It is always a supportive call. It is a call to because we know that there are many sides to a story or parents and guardians might not be aware of to resolve the issue. And so I find that schools are very receptive to us. It is something you need to be very direct and transparent about with the parents and ask always first if you have permission to contact the school, because there are cases, you know, where parents and students fear retaliation, or reporting it, or you know, or earlier in the call, families are very
Hope you're breaking up a little bit, Carl.
and schools are receptive of us, you know, reaching out and offering support.
Right. Right. Okay. So I think, you know, in the sense of who do we reach out to, I think as we pull together whatever methodology we would use, whether it would be a statewide type of survey. I mean, I think we're obviously gathering needs from many sources as we go. But if we do something that is really put out by the partnership, I think, you know, everyone on the call, just reaching out to all the different sectors that are involved in our work. I think, you know, we've mentioned really, you know, many of the different sectors in our conversation. Okay. I think we've already talked about, I think, data points that we, maybe weren't aware of when I listed the 8 that came to mind, and I think that's ongoing work. But as you get off the call, if you think about other data sources that help support the cause, and you know, it's an interesting piece, because I think when I talk about needing data to help drive our decisions, you know, it's that's never going to go away. I mean, I think we're always going to need to start with our justification as to why we want to do more webinars. You know, Tim, I still have, I can forward you the results of the survey of the higher education institutions in Pennsylvania that have education departments. We did that survey back in, I think, maybe 2014. And, you know, I think we're always starting with, you know, what is it that we know in the way of needs, as, you know, as bullying prevention seems to continue to have no endpoint. So I will definitely, you know, pull together the rich conversation. I've been taking notes as we talk, and take a look at, you know, what is our action plan, and really the think tank purpose, you know, of this call is, you know, how do we, everyone on this call already knows the needs, and we hear them every day. We live in this world of the needs, but you know, how do we really develop an action plan to really talk about the continued next steps of the Bully Prevention Partnership? You know, it's kind of interesting that, you know, we've been, like I said, that really our partnership was formed in around 2012, and here we are 5 years in, and, you know, we still are adjusting our plan. We really hunkered down and worked hard to try to move youth engagement, and not with a lot of great success. I mean, maybe the successful part is we uncovered what seems to be true in PA is that youth engagement is kind of all over the place, and there's not really one easy single point of entry to identify what the youth, not only what they need, but what is it that they're doing. We hear often of all these great efforts, and of course we know of It Takes One from Geraldine's work, but that is really a strong goal that the partnership had out, that we really were unable to move, I think, in the direction that we had hoped to do, which was simply increase youth engagement. Not to take that off the table, but I think that we kind of stalled there, and I think where we've circled round is to take a look at what is our action plan in regard to clearly identifying the needs of the schools and communities, not to forget the communities, so that we can continue to offer trainings and justify supporting research-based work, and having webinars, and to make sure that it's done strategically, not on kind of the needs of the last call that I took. And I think you all know what I'm saying, but but to be more collective, like Cheryl was saying, okay, but utilize the data from those calls. So is there anything anybody wants to add in the sense of, just thinking broadly of our partnership, our Bullying Prevention 101, I think, has never done. I think we're all been in this long enough to know that we are continually educating folks in what the basics of what is bullying, and what does research show is needed to improve school climate. But in the sense of being a member of this partnership, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you feel this really needs to be here on the table?
Mary, I have a question for you. Do you know how many schools have an anonymous referral system for bullying prevention, because that's one of the things that has really helped us. We do have an anonymous referral system on our website that students, teachers, and parents have used. And I'm just curious, do other schools have any kind of anonymous referral systems?
That, I think the answer is no, I don't know. And I think your question brings out the broader, there is no, how do I want to say, we don't have profiles of the schools in regard to what they do in bullying prevention, other than every single Safe Schools annual report. Because of the legislation, you have to list what it is you do for bullying prevention. Literally clicking open 500 LEA documents and the charters, we can't answer through a database collection what the schools are doing. That's not a pretty picture, is it? But that's the truth. So I think that's a fantastic question. I had an attorney ask me that at the conference I was at yesterday. He said, "Do you know if schools are using, anonymous reporting systems, and if so, And it's ironic that you would bring that up and he would ask that question. But that is the hard part, as far as it goes back to that question of what do schools need.
Right. One of our concerns when we first started the anonymous referral, we were afraid we would get some that were fake. Mm-hmm. And I think we've been doing it 5 years. And in that 5 years, there's only been one that was not a legitimate one. And that person was actually referring themselves. They were talking in the third person like it wasn't them. So
and I think the broader piece to what you bring up is, how do we highlight best practices of our schools in Pennsylvania? Right. That's not being done, which goes back to Leah's point, right, Leah, about schools connecting with each other.
Geraldine, I think that would be an interesting sort of story to tell. I don't know if it would be case study or what, to be able to offer what happens when a school starts an anonymous reporting system.
Right.
What kinds of, what comes up, and how do you follow up? What type of extra work is it created? How do schools manage that?
Right.
What kind of follow-up do they provide? Because I think when we started the bullying prevention work, there was a lot of confusion out there about, well, can you really, investigate, or can you really call a student in about bullying if you don't have someone who's actually saying they did it? And how do you prove it? And, this whole investigation thing became sort of bogged folks down a bit. And so I think that would be a very interesting, example of one of these case studies that could highlight a best practice, and also some problems of practice that come up when you begin to get really serious.
Right.
So thank you. So what I'm hearing is, one step in our action plan is to develop a way to highlight these best practices / case studies. And like you said, they're not because they're problem free, but how the schools have moved forward. I think that's a fantastic step.
Well, and added to our referral, we actually asked, do any adults already know about this? Have any bystanders helped? Those kind of questions. So you even get that information on whether anybody else has helped, and has anybody else supported you? Have any adults done anything? That kind of thing.
Okay. Do you think, I know there's been some possible talk of some opportunities for state summits. I don't know, Leah, if you can speak to this, or our colleagues at Chip Dip, as far as when we highlight best practices and look at what schools need. Does anybody have any thoughts about an event, an in-person event that brings schools together? Do we need that again, or are we way past that, or?
Mary, this is Tim. I mean, one of the things I know we've talked about constantly in the community of practice on school-based behavioral health, I guess in some ways it's a nice problem to have, but Pennsylvania is so flooded with conference events.
Okay.
It just seems to me adding another one increases the likelihood of something being siloed, rather than strategically looking at what are the key venues that already exist that occur on an annual basis, calendarizing that, and targeting bully prevention proposals and/or negotiating to even get invited sessions at each of those to get commonality of message.
Okay.
Creating a separate
bully prevention summit.
Exactly.
Okay.
And we've had the same conversations around suicide prevention, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's a fantastic point, Tim. And I think if there is a way, or maybe to think of the way to make sure that, like you said, already at these already existing planned events, it's, how do I want to say it? I don't feel it's intentional, but I'm always surprised at the opportunities that we miss. Because I say we, all of the partners that are involved in bullying prevention, to be part of existing conferences, to be able to make those connects. You know, what does bullying prevention have to do with the special education conference, right? What does bullying prevention have to do with, you know, the facilitate PBIS's event, and so on. And I think, you know, that's an ongoing piece, and maybe that's the part where this work has taken us, that it is part of school climate. And I think we've made some inroads there, that it's not a separate topic, so to speak. It's specific in the bullying is a very specific behavior, but it's one thing that impacts the climate. So I think that's a good point, Tim. Does anybody else have any other thoughts about, you know, whether this work is more focused toward webinars and modules, and you know, how do we get this information out to the schools once we know? I think we have plenty to start with of what they need, but as we continue to assess needs.
Mary, it's Cheryl. In hearing what he was just mentioning, it would be an interesting notion to sort of develop an action plan that would allow us to get feedback from those conferences that we know are annual, that involve stakeholders like PASAP or PASNAP, the conferences that are consistent. It would be neat if we could somehow go there and sort of take the temperature of the attendees about, you know, what they think their schools need or what they might know.
Okay.
Not sure how that would look exactly. Maybe the idea of focus group would be good.
I think that's a good point. Getting feedback from conference attendees, specifically what information specifically are they seeking? Are they seeking information about bullying prevention, and if so, what?
I think along. Oh,
I'm
sorry.
That's okay. I think they're a rich audience to help us answer some of the questions that we've been asking.
What were we going to say, Tim? Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, I was simply going to say that I think a starting point for this, and this may seem logical and it may seem simple, but it's actually a pretty complex task.
Okay.
Is creating a resource map of what are the real highly attended and/or priority conference events. For example, we've been utilizing this approach to some extent with the community of practice on school-based behavioral health around youth mental health first aid. So I just pulled that document up, and I don't know, we probably have some 17 or 18 conferences that have been identified with lead contacts, and that might be a starting point. It's by no means an ending point, but I'm almost thinking if we could align energies in just getting a resource map of all the things that do exist, because the one thing that we all know is that none of us know of all of these events that are out there, but we all know of at least 5, 6, or 7 of them.
Right.
There are literally probably at least 40 to 50 different conference events annually that would have relevance for this theme of bully prevention.
Okay.
I'd be shocked if it isn't even more than that.
Right, Tim. Right, but I think, you're so right. Before we would put energy into a summit specifically about this topic, you know, not that would be taken off the table, but how do we align with what all is happening? I know it's been a personal frustration of mine that sometimes I will kind of weasel my way into being a table in a hallway at a state conference, and I got to tell you, I mean, what happens at that, you know, we're highlighting maybe our our conference, our consultation line poster and so on, but what that table turns into, honestly, is people saying, I don't understand, why are you not a session?
Right.
Like, I'm feeling confused, and I know it's not intentional. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're all doing our work. We're all, you know, we all have our priorities and so on. But yeah, let's talk about that, Tim. I'm going to be turning to you for some help there. So you'll be really glad you brought that up.
Well, no, I mean, it's something that we continue to struggle with in
with
some
the COP.
with out of the community of practice. And
Yep.
So, I mean, I think that, maybe there's a way for us to coordinate resources to kind of get this resource map.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Thanks. I think that's a great thinking in the think tank. All righty. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add? And I promise I will summarize our thoughts and send this out. Is there anything else anybody wants to add in the sense of our next steps?
Hi, this is Deb, and Adrian can speak to this as well from Family Design Resources. We are part of the implementation of the statewide adoption and permanency network.
Mm-hmm.
We did a training on bullying prevention as it applies to children who are in out-of-home placement.
Wow.
So, when you think about a population, yes, these kids are also in the schools, but then they have some other special circumstances that they're dealing with in their lives. And so by a result of our doing that training at a statewide meeting, just as a workshop, we got some interest from individual county children and youth agencies to come and talk with their resource parents and their staff about how this issue impacts the children and families that they're working with. So
how bullying prevention does impact.
How bullying prevention.
Okay.
And
thank
how
you.
It's a necessary thing. So it's just something on your radar.
Well, and thank you, Deb and Adrian. And I think you bring up the bigger issue of when you look at our partnership, which has been strong, and I should have taken time in the beginning to thank everyone for continuing to roll up your sleeves and be part of this great work. But I think, just when you look at just our own partnership, making sure that we know within the partnership what each other is doing, right? And, there are webinars being developed and trainings developed and how do we even within our own partnership make sure that as soon as you're doing anything in bullying prevention, besides getting the work done, your next thought is, I got to get this out to the partnership. I got to get this out to the partnership, right?
Yeah, Mary, along those lines, and you may have this and have already done this already.
Okay.
So this may just be ignorance on my part, this being the first call I've been in on.
No, it's fine. Go for it, Tim.
But do you have, I don't know if you have, and I know this will be organic or change periodically, but is there a listing that lists the entities, kind of the lead contact and email for the people in the partnership that we all currently have?
Yes, that exists. It needs to be updated, of course, every school year we update it. It does exist, but, and yes, it can go out, it should go out to everyone. I can do that, but I'm thinking even the sense of what can we build internally that can be our more go-to portal?
Sure.
Okay, thanks,
Yep.
Tim.
Yep, that would be really helpful from my perspective.
That's great, Tim, because basically it's been, you send me something, I send it out to the whole partnership.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And even though I've, maybe, anytime anybody wants, or maybe in the beginning, I was better at sharing the Excel spreadsheet that has all the above. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Tim. Thank you. Okay. All right. Is there anything else? I appreciate you all have hung in there for almost 2 hours on this call. Is there any other thoughts anybody wants to add? Anything? Does everyone agree our work is not done? Do I hear a yes on that? Thank you. I appreciate everyone's willingness to really hang in there in a time when I think last year was a tough year. I think it was a tough year of, are we starting over? And we're not. I mean, I think that's something we need to remember. We really need to constantly be reminded of the Rich Foundation here in Pennsylvania, but obviously not stop there and just say, okay, we're continuing to build this work on a great foundation. There has been fantastic collaboration. I think we've gotten so much better at looking at how do all these initiatives and frameworks and programs work together so that we're not in silos and we're working smarter, not harder. And just, I'm still here. They kept me on for another year, so we're still going to keep on fighting the good fight. So on that note, thank you for all that you do out in the real world. And I'll type up our notes, and we recorded our session, and off we go. And then we'll plan another conversation.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.